never imagined my life would turn out this way. Looking back, it feels like another lifetime, as if the woman I used to be was someone I read about in a book, a distant character with dreams too naive to survive reality. My name is Emily Carter, and I am 52 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, a city where the air is thick with history and the streets whisper stories of the past. I am a teacher, a woman of faith, someone who has always believed in the sacredness of marriage, in the unbreakable vows that bind two souls together. I was raised to believe that love, once promised, should endure no matter the cost. And so I endured. I was 25 when I married Michael. He was my first love, the man I had sworn to love, honor, and cherish for the rest of my days. In those early years, our love felt like something out of a fairy tale. He was attentive, kind, and full of dreams. We spent nights whispering about our future, painting a life together with words and laughter. I held on to those dreams, believing that love, once given, could never fade. But love did fade. Not all at once, not in a dramatic explosion of fights or betrayals. It was slow, like a candle burning down to its wick, like a house growing silent after years of warmth. At first, it was subtle. The way he stopped looking at me the same way, how his touch became rare, how our conversations grew shorter, reduced to mere necessities. And then, over time, silence settled between us like a heavy fog, thick and unshakable. I prayed. Oh, how I prayed. I knelt at my bedside night after night, whispering desperate words into the darkness, begging God to restore what was slipping through my fingers. I fasted, I pleaded, I searched for answers in scripture, in sermons, in the knowing looks of women who had been taught the same things I had. Marriage is forever, they told me. God hates divorce. So I stayed. After all, Michael never laid a hand on me. He never raised his voice in anger, never stormed out of the house in a rage. But was that enough? Was the absence of cruelty the same as love? I wrestled with these thoughts alone. I couldn't speak of them to anyone, because I already knew the answers I would receive. Pray more. Be patient. Submit. And so I endured. Years passed, and I convinced myself that suffering was part of my duty. That love, even if hollow, was still a covenant I had to uphold. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I no longer recognized, someone who had traded joy for obedience, someone who had silenced her own heart for the sake of an unshakable rule. And then one ordinary day, everything changed. It started with dizziness, a slight spinning in my head as I reached for a glass of water. I blinked, trying to steady myself, gripping the edge of the counter as my vision blurred. My body felt heavy, as if the very air around me had thickened, pressing down on me. And then nothing. I didn't feel myself collapse. I didn't feel the cold floor against my skin. One moment I was there, and the next I was somewhere else. Silence. A silence so profound, so absolute, that it swallowed everything. I tried to move, but I had no body. I tried to speak, but I had no voice. It was then that I saw it, myself. I was lying there on the floor, motionless, my skin pale, my chest still. Around me, chaos erupted. A voice, frantic, desperate, called my name, but I couldn't answer. I watched as a phone was grabbed, as trembling hands dialed, as the world I had known spun into panic. I was no longer part of it. A chill ran through whatever I had become. I wanted to go back, to tell them I was still here, still aware. But before I could grasp what was happening, something pulled at me. A force, unseen and relentless, dragging me away from the room, from my body, from everything I had ever known. I plunged into darkness. Not an ordinary darkness, but a void so deep, so infinite, that it felt like the very absence of existence. I was weightless, floating yet sinking, surrounded by nothingness. A whisper stirred in the distance, faint and indistinct, followed by another and another. Then, the whispers turned to screams. Cries of despair, of agony, of souls lost in an unseen abyss. My entire being shuddered as shadows flickered around me, distorted figures with faces contorted in horror. Some moved slowly, others remained frozen in place, but all bore the same expression of terror. I tried to turn away, but there was no direction to escape. I tried to close my eyes, but they were already closed. And then, from within the suffocating void, a voice emerged. It was neither loud nor soft, neither near nor far, but it pierced through me like a blade. It was mocking yet ancient, carrying a weight that made my very soul shiver. Now you know. A tremor of recognition surged through me. I knew what this was. I knew where I was, and I knew what awaited me next. Before we continue this incredible journey, I have something special for you. In every video, we send a special message to those who leave a comment. If you want your name to be mentioned in our next video, take this moment to comment your name and city below. Imagine hearing your name in front of thousands of people, your moment, your recognition. Also, if you are new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our community. This channel is a place of faith, revelation, and transformation, and I would love for you to be part of it. Now, let's move forward. There is much more to be revealed. The darkness around me was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was a void, an emptiness so complete that it felt as though it had swallowed time itself. There was no up or down, no sense of direction, only the overwhelming awareness that I was no longer part of the world I had left behind. The whispers continued, threading through the silence like thin, unraveling strings. At first, they were faint, like murmurs carried by the wind. But as I drifted deeper into the abyss, they grew louder, sharper, filled with something I couldn't quite name: pain, regret, despair. And then the screams came. They rose from the nothingness, echoing from all directions at once. Cries of agony, of terror, of souls caught in a place they could not escape. My chest tightened, even though I was no longer sure if I had a chest at all. A fear unlike any I had ever known wrapped itself around me, pulling me deeper into the void. I tried to move, to turn away from the unseen horrors, but I had no control. Something was pulling me downward. The deeper I fell, the more the shadows began to take form. At first, they were just flickers in the darkness, vague silhouettes shifting at the edges of my awareness. But soon, I could see them. Figures twisted and contorted, their faces frozen in expressions of unbearable torment. Some of them whispered, others wept, and some simply stared into the nothingness, their eyes hollow and empty. I knew then I was in the presence of the lost. The thought sent a chill through me, deeper than any cold I had felt in my earthly body. I wanted to scream, to call out to God, but no words would come. It was as if my voice had been stolen, as if the very air around me rejected sound. Then suddenly something changed. From the distance, a light appeared. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker, a weak, wavering glow, barely strong enough to push back the surrounding darkness. But as it grew, the air around me shifted, as if the very fabric of this place trembled at its presence. The light began to spread, pushing back the shadows, forcing them to retreat. The screams softened, the whispers faded, and for the first time since my fall, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope. A warmth spread through me, filling the emptiness that had settled in my soul. The light grew stronger, its radiance breaking through the abyss like the first crack of dawn after a long, endless night. And then I heard a voice. Not the mocking voice from before, not the whispers of the lost, but something else, something greater. It spoke with an authority that made everything within me tremble, yet its tone was not cruel. It was powerful, yet filled with something I had not felt in a long time: understanding, compassion, love. Emily. My name. Spoken not with indifference, not as a passing thought, but as a call, an undeniable summons that resonated through every part of me. I turned toward the light, and for the first time, I saw something beyond the void. A figure stood within the radiance. I couldn't see his face, but his presence was overwhelming. It was as if every part of my soul recognized him, even though my mind struggled to comprehend it. I knew who he was. Tears welled in my eyes, if I still had eyes, because in that moment, I realized the truth. I had not fallen into the abyss to be abandoned. I had been brought here to be shown something. The light pulsed around him, and as it did, the void around me began to shift. The figures, the whispers, the cries, they began to change. And then the visions began. I saw glimpses of my past, my life laid bare before me. Not just the moments I had chosen to remember, but even those I had tried to forget. My wedding day, my prayers at night, the silent suffering I had endured for so many years. But I also saw something else. I saw the weight I had carried, the chains I had bound myself with, the fear that had governed my every decision. And in that moment, as I stood before the presence in the light, a realization settled over me like a whisper carried on the wind. I had believed my suffering was righteous, that my pain was proof of my obedience, that enduring without question was the only path to favor in God's eyes. But now, standing here, I was being asked to see something different. The light grew stronger, surrounding me like a protective shield. The voices that once tormented the air had faded into an eerie silence, and for the first time since my fall into the abyss, I could breathe, if I even still had lungs. I stood motionless, my entire being frozen in reverence and awe. The figure before me remained partially veiled in the radiance, his form impossible to define, yet his presence undeniable. "You are afraid." His voice carried through me, deeper than any sound I had ever known. It did not simply reach my ears. It filled me, resonating within every part of my existence. I opened my mouth to speak, to explain, to justify the terror that had gripped me for so long, but no words came. I had spent years silencing my own doubts, convincing myself that suffering in silence was the right thing to do, that it was holy, that it was necessary. But in this place, there were no lies, no masks, no excuses. I was completely exposed, every thought, every wound, every unspoken sorrow laid bare before the presence standing in front of me. The light pulsed again, and suddenly, visions flooded my mind. I saw my wedding day, my heart full of hope, my soul soaring with belief in the life I was about to begin. I remembered the way Michael had looked at me then, his smile wide, his promises unwavering. But the scene shifted. Now I was older, sitting at our kitchen table, turning my wedding ring between my fingers. My eyes were hollow, my shoulders slumped, my soul weighed down by an invisible burden. Another shift. I was on my knees beside my bed, my hands clasped in desperate prayer. My lips moved, pleading with God to restore my marriage, to bring back the love that had been lost. Night after night, I had cried in that very spot, waiting for an answer that never seemed to come. And then the final vision, the moment of my fall. I saw myself collapse onto the cold floor, my body lifeless, my spirit torn from the world in an instant. The weight of it all crashed over me, overwhelming, undeniable. For years, I had convinced myself that I was enduring for a purpose, that staying in a lifeless marriage was a righteous act, that my suffering had meaning. But here, before him, I was being asked something I had never considered. Was it really obedience, or was it fear? The question struck me like a blade, slicing through everything I thought I knew. My soul trembled. I had spent my entire life believing that leaving would be a sin, that the covenant of marriage was unbreakable, no matter the cost, that God would rather see me miserable and bound than see me free. But now I wasn't so sure. The light around me shifted, and new visions began to unfold. I saw women just like me. Some sat in dark, silent houses, staring blankly at walls that had once echoed with laughter. Others knelt in prayer, whispering words I knew by heart, pleas for restoration, for healing, for clarity. And then I saw those who had left. Some bore scars, both seen and unseen, still burdened by guilt, by the fear that they had lost favor with God. Others stood in new lives, still afraid to believe that they were allowed to be happy again. The pain in their eyes mirrored my own. How many women had been told that suffering was their duty? How many had been silenced by the weight of expectations, by the belief that endurance was more pleasing to God than honesty? The presence before me did not move, but his voice returned, firm yet gentle. You have lived in fear, not in faith. Tears streamed down my face, not out of sorrow, but because in that moment I understood. I had never asked him. I had asked my church, my family, my friends. I had listened to the voices around me, to the doctrines that had been drilled into my soul. But I had never asked him what he truly desired. Was it possible that God's love was not as rigid as I had been told? Was it possible that I had not been trapped by divine law, but by human misunderstanding? The air around me shifted again, the light expanding, embracing me like warm arms pulling me closer. My heart ached, not from sorrow, but from the sheer weight of revelation. And then, one last whisper echoed through the space. The truth will set you free if you have the courage to embrace it. The air around me shimmered, as if the very fabric of this place was shifting. I felt suspended between what I had always believed and the truth that was now unraveling before me. The presence before me had not moved, yet I felt something changing, not in him, but in me. For the first time in my life, I was questioning what I had been taught, not because I wanted an easy way out, but because I had seen something undeniable. The light pulsed once more, and suddenly, new visions appeared before me. I saw Moses standing before the people of Israel, speaking of the bill of divorce. His voice echoed through the ages, carrying words I had never fully understood before. I saw Jesus standing before the Pharisees, confronting them on their hardened hearts, challenging the laws that had been twisted over time to burden rather than to guide. I saw Paul, writing to the early church, cautioning about unions built on unequal yokes, urging them to seek not only commitment but also truth and love. And then I saw myself, the younger version of me, the woman who had once believed that love alone could withstand anything. The woman who had stayed, not because she wanted to, but because she feared what leaving would mean. The woman who had begged for signs, who had pleaded for answers, but who had been too afraid to truly listen. And now I was listening. The voice of the presence before me returned, filling the space like a gentle but unshakable force. You feared breaking a law, but the law was never meant to break you. A trembling breath escaped me, though I wasn't sure if I even had lungs in this place. Was that what I had been missing all along? Had I spent my life believing that God desired my suffering, when all along, he had only ever wanted me to seek him in truth? I wanted to respond, to ask 1,000 questions, but I couldn't. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. The weight I had carried for years, the chains of guilt, of fear, of self-imposed suffering, began to loosen. But one question remained, lingering at the edges of my thoughts. If I was free to leave my past behind, what came next? The light pulsed again, but this time, it did not grow stronger. Instead, it began to dim, as if something was shifting once more. I felt the world around me changing, the presence before me still near, but no longer holding me in place. I was being sent back. And with that realization came a final whisper, one that would stay with me long after this moment ended. Go and walk in the truth you now know. The world vanished in an instant. Before we continue, I have something special for you. I want to send a personal message to those who are part of this journey with us. Drop a comment below with your name and the city you're watching from. In our next video, I'll mention some of you personally. Imagine hearing your name in front of thousands of people, being part of this incredible community. Also, don't forget to like this video. It helps us reach more people who need this message of faith and revelation. Now, let's move forward, because what happens next will change everything. I gasped as if I had been drowning, my chest rising sharply as air rushed into my lungs. The world around me was no longer bathed in divine light. It was familiar, earthly. The cold floor pressed against my back, the dim glow of the lamp in the corner casting faint shadows on the walls of my living room. I was back. Disoriented, I blinked, trying to process what had happened. My body trembled, not from cold, but from the lingering echoes of something greater than this world. It had not been a dream. The memory of that radiant presence, of the voice that had spoken directly to my soul, of